Welcome to Face the State. I'm Ariana Bennett. Thank you for joining us. Our warm, dry winter overall has been a far cry from this time 1 year ago when back-to-back storms left area neighborhoods underwater, prompting emergency aid from the federal government. And a year later, flood damage is still a concern in the hardest hit areas. In this episode, I'll find out what our public officials are doing about it. But first, here's a look back. Northern Nevada got very familiar with the atmospheric river in 2017, the weather system that made for the wettest winter here on record. We saw widespread flooding across the region, but the Lemon Valley area got the brunt of it. The previously dry Swan Lake filled up with water.
So it's a big bowl that's just water's been feeding into from all the areas, and that's why it flooded.
Flooding homes and shocking homeowners who say they didn't know they lived in a floodplain.
We did not know that. We had no clue. We weren't warned of it. Nothing.
As residents moved to higher ground, Washoe County worked to stop the damage, building a HESCO barrier and pumping out water. The only thing to do then, they said, was wait for the water to naturally recede. But months later, in December, residents still found themselves underwater.
Look at this mess. It used to look like this.
Linda Walls is one of several Lemon Valley residents whose homes were still uninhabitable from the previous winter.
This was all full of water. We can't live here. No, there's no way.
Walls was living in this home on a friend's property nearby, getting some financial help from Washoe County.
We're on a fixed income now. We're both retired. We can't afford to do all this stuff. I mean, I worked hard for all my money and to have all the landscaping done and then have it ruined. So that's the bottom line.
All right, so where does the situation stand now? Washoe County Manager John Slaughter is here with me now to talk about that. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so I think obviously nobody expected to have back-to-back huge storms kind of wreaking havoc on our area. And really, did we see it lasting this long?
Well, I don't think we expected it to last this long. Go back December of 2016, we were kind of hoping for a good weather year. We had depending on your view, a great weather year. We had, snowpack was wonderful, helped us with the drought, but then we got the flooding. I think over 16 atmospheric rivers that were of heavy or extreme conditions. So we just had a heavy rainfall precipitation year.
Yeah, it was maybe too much of a good thing.
Yes.
Yes. So, what we ended up seeing is this dry lake bed turning into an actual lake, and nowhere for that water to go, no natural outlet, right?
Right. Swan Lake, it was what we're talking about. Swan Lake is a terminal lake, so it's a basin, and so anything that's leading into that basin, everything's going there. There's no place for it to go out. So really, evaporation is the natural method of that water leaving Swan Lake at this point in time.
So where are we right now in that process?
So as you know, the county, with assistance from the state, we built barriers, the HESCO barriers, pumping. We continue to pump to this day. We have divers that go out several times a month and check the culverts that prevent the water from backflowing back into some of the homes. We are in a process that we're faced with, the barriers being up for quite a while, the pumping continuing. We are expending about $1.2 million a year going forward, probably at least for another year, to maintain that system of pumps and barriers and all of the things that we have in place to prevent the homes being flooded again.
Is there an end in sight?
There is. Swan Lake, there's maps going back to the 1860s that show it full of water, and certainly 2 years ago there was very little water in the lake. So the end is really that natural system of evaporation. There are areas that are outside of the lake, on sort of on the dry side, if you will, of the barriers where there is water away from homes. That was intentional. We knew we couldn't get all the water out. That water will also evaporate over time. So really, it's at this point, it's a matter of time. We don't need more atmospheric rivers, certainly, to put more water into the lake. I think back in November, we saw a heavy rainstorm that increased the lake, but we were prepared. Again, we had set up the systems of protection that worked. We saw that worked.
Okay, so then looking to the future, are there any major fixes that are possible to put in that area to stop something like this from damaging homes?
Right, so we're kind of following a three-point process in Lemon Valley, Swan Lake area. Number one is, as I mentioned earlier, to keep in place those barriers, those pumping systems, those types of things to prevent the current situation. We've identified 10 properties, working with the state, working with FEMA. Those 10 properties have all been offered a buyout mitigation plan that basically those homeowners, 9 of those properties have agreed and have decided that they want to participate in the program. With assistance from FEMA, with the county. Basically, those homeowners, the land that their homes are on will be purchased, the homes would be demolished, and those would become open space, never to be, no, residents won't be on those properties ever again. And those were the most impacted. One of the things to remember is really we only had 4 homes, and if you're one of those homes, it's the worst thing, 4 homes that had water in the homes. The other properties in Lemon Valley that were affected really had water on their property. Access to the property was impacted. It was for weeks at a time. It was impossible to get into your property, but the homes themselves weren't flooded. So moving forward, we're looking at, again, at systems to prevent the homes that were going to be purchased, but also systems to prevent and prevent that access from being cut off in the future.
Okay, where is the funding coming from for programs like this?
So, working with the federal government, again, initially, Washoe County and the state funded all of the programs. The initial response, the mitigation that's happening, with knowledge that FEMA, through their programs, will fund 75% of those of all these programs. So when we talk about the buyout program, FEMA will fund up to 75% of that, the qualifying homes to be purchased. The other 25% will come from Washoe County, and that can come through in-kind types of systems as well. So relocating those families to other properties, the county can locate some property that perhaps we already own and help them relocate to those properties.
The part of this that the county is responsible for paying for, is that putting a squeeze on the county?
It is. So just one example. So we've spent upwards of $7 million in our flood response from 2017 flooding. We depleted our $3 million emergency fund. They call it contingency fund. We've depleted that fund. We continue to find ways to fund the programs. Mosquito abatement, we spent close to $600,000 in emergency mosquito abatement during that time period. Again, it's all knowing that in time, and it will take time, through the federal government, a 75% rebate to the county, if you will. We're counting on that, but for now, the county is fronting those, and it is a strain on our budget.
Worst case scenario, say we have a miracle March, which is good for our water supply, typically something we look at positively in this region. Right. But if we were to get a bunch of atmospheric rivers, another set of systems like we saw last year, is the county prepared to deal with something like that? We
are, and again, I would point to the protection system that we put into place. We got a little bit of a view of that back in November. We had that very heavy rain. The system worked as it's designed. We have opened up portions of Lemon Drive. If we need to, we can close those HESCO barriers to prevent issues. We are prepared. As I said, we're continuing. We're spending $1.2 million in next year's budget on continuing those barriers, those protection systems, and that's really what would be the difference. Go back to December of 2016, those systems weren't there. Of course, the lake was much lower, but it didn't take long before it raised. We didn't have those systems in place at the time. We do now.
And this is just part of a broader flooding concern too when you look at our region in total. And I know that there's a pretty detailed plan to mitigate flooding in other places in our region, right. but funding is the big issue there too. So would you say that flooding is one of our top issues that needs a solution?
It is. So it's kind of interesting. I would classify probably two: wildland fires and flooding. So not enough water in one situation and too much water in the other situation. It is a top priority, and that's, as I was talking about earlier about the 3-point plan, a flood response plan, and tuning that up is something that we're working on, so that when this happens again, and it's a when it happens again, not if, when this happens again, we'll be prepared.
Okay. I know I've spoken to the Truckee Meadows flood management people about their overall plan. They need $440-something million to implement the big fixes they want to implement, but they need a dedicated funding source for that. It's not going to come through the funding source that they currently have. So in order to deal with this issue, would you anticipate the public seeing some kind of additional fee in order to fund improvements?
So the Truckee River flooding project, that's the Truckee River alone. And so the system in Lemon Valley, it's localized flooding. Spanish Springs has an area where the homeowners there have paid an additional assessment to deal with stormwater. That could be something that could be used in other areas. Certainly some of the things that we're looking at is how that's worked in Spanish Springs and some of the other areas, how we could maybe apply that to other areas. Okay.
Anything else you wanted to say about flooding before we take?
No, I just would say, you know, as always, be prepared. Back in December, you know, from December through March, we distributed over 1 million sandbags. And so there's responsibility on all sides. The county certainly has its role. The state has its role. Homeowners should always be prepared. We're going to see flooding again. It's just a given. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Sit tight. Coming up on Face the State, I'll be back with the county manager to talk about public safety, housing, homelessness. Stay with us.